Hello students, and welcome to your fourth lecture on hematology. My name is Dr. Kasanga. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me or use the discussion boards on ClickUp, or you can come visit me in my office at BMS 912. In this lecture, we will cover the different blood groups. So your blood groups are determined by specific antigens that are present on the surface of your red blood cells. Your antigens are proteins which react with specific antibodies, which are then present in your plasma. All blood types are inherited from your parents. When it comes to your blood groups, there are two important systems for determining your blood groups. So firstly, there's the ABO system, which has 4 different blood groups. The A blood group, the B blood group, the AB blood group, and the O blood group. Then there's the rhesus factor system, which has 2 blood groups, your rhesus factor positive and your rhesus factor negative blood group. So let's take a closer look at the ABO blood system. So as I mentioned, your blood group is determined by the antigen that's present on the surface of your red blood cells. So if you're blood group A, then it means that you have the A antigen on the surface of your red blood cells. If you're blood group B, then you have the B antigen on the surface of your red blood cells. If you're blood group AB, then you have both A and B antigens on the surface of your red blood cell. And if you're blood group O, then you have neither A nor B antigens on your red blood cell. So there's no antigens on the red blood cell. So besides the antigens on your red blood cell, you also have antibodies in your plasma. Now you can't have the same antibody in your plasma as the antigen that's on the surface of your red blood cell. So if you're blood group A and you have the A antigen on your red blood cell, then you have the B antibodies in your plasma. So you have anti-B antibodies in your plasma. If you're blood group B, then you have the B antigen on your red blood cell, then you have the anti-A antibodies in your plasma. If you're blood group AB, because you have both A and B antigens on your red blood cell, then you won't have any antibodies in your plasma. So there's no A or B antibodies in your plasma. And if you're blood group O, then you have no antigen on your red blood cell, so you'll have both the A and the B antibodies in your plasma. And this same rule will apply for your rhesus factor system. So if you're Rh positive, then you have the Rh antigen on your surface of your red blood cell. But because you have the Rh antigen, then you can't have the Rh antibodies in your plasma, so you'll have no antibodies in the plasma. If you're Rh negative, then you have no antigen on the surface of your red blood cell, but that means that you will have the anti-Rh antibodies in your plasma. So there are 3 types of Rh antigens, but your Rh system is determined by the D antigen. So if you have the D antigen, then you are Rh positive. If you don't have the D antigen, then you're Rh negative. So 85% of the population is Rh positive, so they have the D antigen, whereas 15% of the population is Rh negative, so they don't have the D antigen. So your blood group is determined by both your ABO and your Rh system. So if we look at blood types in South Africa, the most common blood type is O positive. Okay, that means that you have neither the A or the B antigen on your red blood cell surface, but you do have the Rh antigen on your red blood cell surface, so you'll be O positive, and that's the most common blood type in South Africa. This is followed by A positive, and then B positive, and then O negative, A negative, AB positive, B negative, and then AB negative is the least common blood type in South Africa. So if we look at the inheritance of blood types, in the ABO system, the A and B phenotypes are the dominant phenotypes, whereas the O phenotype is the recessive phenotype. In the Rh system, your Rh positive is your dominant phenotype, whereas the Rh negative is the recessive phenotype. However, even though O is a recessive phenotype, because it is so prevalent, it still happens to be the most common blood type. So even though it's recessive, it is still the most common blood type. So in this example, we can see the inheritance of blood types. So this is how the inheritance of blood types will work. So in this example, you have a mother that's blood type O and a father that's blood type AB. So if you're blood type O, that means you carry both copies of the O gene. So you have 2 copies of the O gene. If you're blood type AB, then it means you carry the A gene and the B gene. So that will give you a blood type AB. So if you look at the inheritance, you'll see that there's a 50% chance that you'll produce a child that's A and a 50% chance that you'll produce a child that's B. But the child will still carry the O gene. You can see all the children will carry the O gene, but because the O gene is recessive, they will express the A gene. So they will be A or they will be B because this is the dominant phenotype, but they will still carry this recessive phenotype, and it means that they can pass on this recessive phenotype to future children. So let's take a look at this example where you have a father that's blood type A but carries 2 copies of the A gene, and a mother that's blood type O but carries 2 copies of the O gene. So I'll give you a few seconds to try work out the inheritance pattern. So in this example, you have a 100% chance of producing a child that's blood type A. So all the children from this couple will be blood type A, but they will all carry the O gene. So they will still carry this recessive phenotype, but they will express the A gene. So how about this example? In this example, you have a mother that's blood type B, but carries the O gene, and a father that's blood type A, but carries the O gene as well. So what would be the inheritance pattern for this couple? So in this example, you have a 25% chance of producing a child that's blood type AB, 25% chance of producing a child that's blood type A, a 25% chance of producing a child that's blood type B, and a 25% chance of producing a child that's blood type O. So you can produce all the different blood groups from this couple. But if the child is blood type A or blood type B, they will still carry the O gene. So they will still carry that recessive phenotype, and they can still pass on that phenotype to future children. So let's take a look at an example with the rhesus factor. In this example, the mother is rhesus factor negative, so she has 2 copies of the recessive phenotype. So that's indicated by the small d. And the father is rhesus factor positive, so that's indicated by the capital D. So he carries that dominant phenotype for the rhesus factor, but he also carries 1 copy of the recessive phenotype. So in this example, you have a 50% chance of producing a child that is rhesus factor positive and a 50% chance of producing a child that's rhesus factor negative. But all the children will carry this recessive phenotype even if they are rhesus factor positive. And then lastly, we have an example of a mother that's rhesus factor positive and a father that's rhesus factor positive, but they both carry the recessive phenotype. So in this example, you will have a 75% chance of producing a child that's rhesus factor positive and a 25% chance of producing a child that's rhesus factor negative. So you can produce a child that is rhesus factor positive and carries 2 copies of the dominant gene, or you can produce a child that's rhesus factor positive and carries a copy of the recessive phenotype. And then it's also possible to produce a child that's rhesus factor negative and has 2 copies of the recessive phenotype. So with your understanding of blood groups inheritance, can you figure out which of these potential blood groups could be the father? So you have a mother that's B negative and a child that's O positive. So which one of these blood groups could have fathered that child? So we will discuss this in the in-person lecture, and I will give you guys the answer in that lecture. So blood groups are also important for determining whether a blood transfusion will be successful or not. So now let's take a closer look at blood transfusions. So before we start talking about the blood transfusion, let's get 2 terms clear. Firstly, the donor is the individual that donates the blood, and the recipient is the individual that receives the blood. In order for a successful donor-recipient pair, you need to consider two things: the donor's antigens on the surface of their red blood cells and the recipient's antibodies in their plasma. In order for a successful donation, the donor's antigens and the recipient's antibodies must be different. So I'll repeat that. In order for a donation to be successful, the donor's antigens and the recipient's antibodies must be different. So let's first start looking at the ABO system and how donations work in the ABO system. So remember, for a donation to be successful, the donor's antigens and the recipient's antibodies must be different. So if you look at blood type O, there's no antigen on the surface of the red blood cell. So that means blood type O can donate to all the blood groups. Blood type O can donate to other people that are blood type O, they can donate to blood type A, and they can donate to blood type B, and they can donate to blood type AB, because there's no antigen on the surface of their red blood cells. If you look at blood type A can only donate to those that don't have A antibodies in their plasma. So the only blood type that doesn't have A antibodies in their plasma are other blood type A's and blood type AB. There's no A antibody in the plasma. If you look at blood type B, they can only donate to people that don't have B antibodies in the plasma. So because there's the B antigen on the surface of the red blood cell, they can only donate to those that do not have B antibodies in their plasma. So the only group that doesn't have B antibodies in their plasma are other blood type B's and blood type AB. There's no B antibody in the plasma. And then lastly, if you look at AB, they can only donate to those that do not have A or B antibodies in the plasma, and the only blood group that doesn't have A or B antibodies in the plasma are other blood type ABs. So you can use this diagram to determine who can donate to who in the ABO system. If you look at the rhesus factor system, the same rule will apply. So if you're rhesus factor negative, then you can donate to everyone in the rhesus factor system because there's no antigen on the surface of the red blood cell. So you can donate to other people that are rhesus factor negative, and you can donate to those that are rhesus factor positive. If you're rhesus factor positive, because you have the rhesus factor antigen on your red blood cell, you can only donate to those that do not have rhesus factor antibodies in the plasma. And the only group that doesn't have rhesus factor antibodies in the plasma are those that are Rh positive. So positive can only donate to positive. So by using these charts, you can determine who will be the universal donor. So the universal donor will be the blood group at the top. So O negative is the universal donor because it can donate to all blood types. And the universal recipient will be the blood type at the bottom. So AB positive will be the universal recipient because it can receive blood from all different types of blood. So let's take a look at some examples. So the first example is, can blood type A positive donate to A negative? So if we look at the ABO system, blood type A can donate to blood type A. But if you look at the rhesus factor system, positive cannot donate to negative. So because the antibodies in your negative will be Rh antibodies, and on the positive you will have the Rh antigen, a positive cannot donate to a negative. So this donation would not be successful and it would lead to a transfusion reaction. So in this next example, we're looking at O positive donating to B positive. So if you look at the ABO system, O can donate to B, and if you look at the rhesus factor system, positive can donate to positive. So this donation would be successful. How about A negative to AB positive? So again, if you look at the ABO system, A can donate to AB, and negative can donate to positive. So again, this donation would be successful. If you remember, AB positive is the universal recipient, so it can receive blood from all different blood types. So can you complete this table by yourself? In this table, we're looking at donations from different blood types. So if O negative can donate to AB negative, and then if AB negative can donate to O negative. So you'll complete by either ticking or putting a cross if the donations are successful. So again, we will complete this table in class when we have an in-person lecture. So let's take a look at what happens when you give blood to the wrong person. So in this example, you have a donor that's blood type B and a recipient that's blood type A. So the donor has the B antigen on the surface of their red blood cells, and the recipient has the anti-B antibodies in their plasma. So this is what's going to lead to a transfusion reaction. So in a transfusion reaction, the recipient's antibodies will bind to the antigen on the donor's red blood cell. So you can see there's binding of the antibodies to the antigens. And these antibodies will bind to the antigens and bind to one another, which will lead to the red blood cells getting stuck in your capillaries. So you have these blood cells that are bound to one another, and that leads to them getting stuck in the capillaries, and that can lead to blockages in your capillaries, which can decrease oxygen and nutrient flow to certain tissues. You can imagine if this happens in your heart or in your brain, that can lead to death of your heart tissue, which could lead to a heart attack, and it could lead to death in your brain tissue, which can lead to a stroke. And then another thing that will happen is that your red blood cells will undergo hemolysis. So because they're bound to one another, they're more prone to damage as they're traveling through your circulation, and that will lead to hemolysis of these red blood cells, and they will leak all their cellular contents. So you'll have a lot of hemoglobin that's been released into your circulation, and this will cause precipitation of your hemoglobin, and that can interfere with your kidney function as your kidneys try to get rid of this excess hemoglobin in the circulation, and that can then lead to kidney damage. So the last thing I want to discuss in this lecture is Hemopure, which can be used as an alternative for blood donations. So Hemopure is a bovine-derived hemoglobin molecule that has been stabilized with this glutaraldehyde polymer. So it's a stabilized hemoglobin molecule. So because this Hemopure has been stabilized with this glutaraldehyde polymer, it does not interfere with kidney function when it's administered to patients. And this Hemopure allows for the carrying of oxygen outside of your red blood cell. So you transfuse these patients with this Hemopure, and it transports oxygen outside of the red blood cell. Because there are no blood cells involved, it's suitable for all blood types. So there's no chance of a transfusion reaction. It can also be used with patients who cannot accept blood transfusions for religious reasons. Hemopure also has good perfusion because it's much smaller than your red blood cells. It can fit through very small capillaries. So it has very good perfusion, and it has a very long shelf life, so it can stay for about 2 years at room temperature, whereas blood can only last for about 42 days in the refrigerator. So this is used as an alternative for blood transfusions. So some studies have shown that there are some side effects to this Hemopure, so there is some limited kidney damage, and it can also cause some cardiac problems. So at the moment, Hemopure is only approved for use in certain countries such as South Africa and Russia. So this concludes the lecture on blood groups. In this lecture, we learned about the ABO system, which has 4 different blood types: A, B, AB, and O. We learned about the rhesus factor system that has rhesus factor positive and rhesus factor negative. We also learned about the inheritance of blood types. So we learned about the different dominant phenotypes and recessive phenotypes. We also learned about blood transfusions. And very important for blood transfusion is that the donor antigen and the recipient antibody must be different in order to have a successful blood transfusion. And if you have an unsuccessful blood transfusion, this can lead to a transfusion reaction, which has very serious side effects. And then lastly, we also learned about Hemopure, which can be used as an alternative for blood transfusions. So this brings us to the end of this lecture. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me or use the discussion boards on ClickUp.